My name is Renee Sills, and I live in Portland, Oregon. I grew up in Colorado and spent a number of years in Montreal. And I've lived in Portland for 7 years now. I grew up with a dance and movement community, and yoga was always a part of my life. I knew about it for a long time. And when I was in college in Montreal, it was very cold. And I started practicing at a hot yoga studio, mostly to be warm. And then I found that over time, I started feeling a lot better. I noticed improvements in my thinking and my emotional patterns. And about a year and a half or 2 years after I'd been going to the studio very regularly, I'd become friends with a visiting teacher, and he encouraged me to think about teaching. And the owner of the studio had community classes that were taught by graduates of their teacher training program. And at that time, there were no recent grads to teach them. So she suggested that I try teaching them, which I did. And I taught the community classes for about a year. And then I got put on the schedule and started teaching regular classes. And a few years later, I did a month-long intensive with Richard Freeman. I'd known about him growing up in Boulder, Colorado, but became really interested in him primarily because of his really exceptional grasp on yoga philosophy. So I started studying with him and practicing Ashtanga and kind of more in the Mysore tradition for a couple of years. It was around the time when I moved to Portland that I had known about Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen and the work of body-mind centering for a long time, longer than I had known about Richard. I had had an anatomy teacher when I was a teenager who was a BMC practitioner. So she'd been on my radar for a long time, and then when I moved to Portland, I found out she was doing a 2-year-long training in Berkeley, California called Embodied Developmental Movement and Yoga, which looked at embryology and embryonic patterning and developmental movement, really the first year of life, and applied those patterns to yoga. So I studied with her for a long time and got really invested in body-mind centering as a technique. Went through about 5 years in their school, and it really changed my practice and my approach to yoga. It became a lot gentler, and I was really interested in embryonic patterns and the way that anatomy grows, which continues to inform me and change me. And most recently, I've been studying with a teacher in Portland named Todd Jackson, who's a cranial therapist and really gifted yoga teacher. So he and Amy Matthews, she runs the body-mind centering and yoga programs in the US, are my primary teachers now and continue to guide me. Studying embryology and studying the formation of the body has given me a lot of different perspective on how the body moves. A lot of our mature or adult movement patterns, well, all of the mature and adult movement patterns started somewhere. And it's been totally fascinating to understand the origin of movement and how the ontogenetic, which is the development of the human, mirrors the phylogenetic, which is the development of the species from single-celled organisms to more complex bodies that we are. And learning about those movement patterns in my body, so a lot of what body-mind centering does is it embodies science. So we'll learn about the biology of the human and the physiology of the systems now, but rather than just learning it from books or from talking about it, we spend time sensing it, doing meditative awareness practices to feel it, We do palpation and hands-on touch to help to help other people feel it in their bodies, but then also as a tool to feel it in our own. And we do a lot of movement so that we can practice moving from different systems, or kind of relearning or recreating a lot of the embryonic and developmental patterns. And this was huge for me. I realized, first of all, that I'd been working way too hard to move. And that happens to a lot of people. They skip developmental steps, or for whatever reason, develop movement patterns that are not as efficient as they could be. So learning the embryonic patterns helped me relearn and rediscover the inherent strength and ease within my body. It also helped me a lot working with my students and clients. It gave me really practical tools to assist people in remembering how efficiently and easily they could move. And it gave me a context for yoga philosophy, which might be the most important part for me. I have the type of mind that trends towards more cynical or doubting first, and I really want to know, I want to know why. So I was very drawn to yoga philosophy. It seems to offer a lot in terms of emotional reason to live, but I was having trouble with it because it felt really fantastical to me. I didn't know how to place it. And learning about embryology and the formation of the body actually made a lot of these energetic patterns that are talked about in yoga philosophy make sense in a totally different way. So through science, I was able to really embrace more of, I would say, an esoteric or spiritual understanding of my practice. A lot of my practice has been understanding emotional landscape in my body. I definitely have a tendency to think about my feelings before I feel them, and can get overwhelmed by feelings. And having the tools of physical awareness or somatic awareness, body-centered awareness, has been so helpful and crucial for me to be able to track the sensation of emotion through my body. Over and over, I keep relearning the lesson that things come up in my life. I've definitely had a lot of grief and a fair amount of trauma, some big losses in my life. And not unlike probably most people, when those events have happened, I check out, I leave my body, I indulge whatever addictive patterns seem most accessible at that moment. And over and over again, I find my way back through body-centered practices. I find it to be ultimately the most nourishing and nurturing place to just connect to the ground, to remember that I'm supported by the elements, by the earth and the air and water and fire, to feel them in my own body, to remember that my body is pretty intelligent. It knew how to grow. It continues to know how to function, and it will know how to die someday. And I can let my mind take a back seat. That's an important one for me to continue to remember. My breath is my best friend. Grief is a really familiar emotion to me. It's a place that I have spent a lot of time and continue to spend time. And I guess having a body practice and having a breath practice, having a meditation practice, and I consider meditation to be anything that's awareness. Having these practices kind of help me accept whatever is arising and feel it, and the more that I can accept and feel what's arising, tends to be the quicker that it passes and the less damage that it does long term. So I know in the moments where I need to push things away or where I can't acknowledge them, those emotions get stored in my body and end up creating a lot of problems. And that's the field of somatic therapy that I've definitely been invested in a lot, is the space where our bodies and our feelings and our thoughts are all one thing. So for me, working through the body is often more efficient than trying to unravel all the thoughts, because as you know, they're endless and they are just one perspective and they never really make sense. I find the most nourishment in my life being in nature, being in the trees and in the mountains, solitude, spending time alone, dancing, which is my first love, is just free movement, not any choreography, but just letting my body move, and making art, any type of creative practice where I just get to express and not worry about it, really makes my heart big. Embodiment or embodied is a word that is becoming kind of a catch-all or trend word right now. A lot of the work that I do academically is kind of picking apart what embodiment means, and it means something really different in the communities that practice yoga and dance and things like somatic therapies than it does in other communities. So probably in the context that we're talking in right now, embodied or embodiment practice is kind of an arriving practice, arriving in the physical sensation, arriving in the present moment. To embody information is to integrate it and then to be able to live it. So an embodiment practice would be something where we take information into our bodies and integrate it through our habits and our thinking processes and the reflexes that create ties between thought and physical response. The other way to look at this word, embodied, is more through the lens of identity politics. And we might talk about embodied identity, what it means for me, for example, to embody the identity of being a woman, and how that has shaped me and how that's shaped my perspective and my action and reaction in the world. When people are oppressed, and I would say that all of us have experienced some type of oppression, we embody oppression, and we embody kind of our own version of the limitation that is placed on us through others or through society at large. So the word embodied, when we're talking about identity politics, means something really different than when we're talking about somatic awareness. However, I think that the two illuminate each other, and that's actually where a lot of my interest is to be able to become aware of the things that we embody and we would rather not, and then to have the tools to make different choices. So if I know that I've experienced oppression as a female because of the way that women are viewed in society, or because of the way that I have been socialized through my life, I, through a practice of awareness, can start to see all of the places where I keep myself limited or where I keep myself fearful. And it's through this practice of awareness that I then become more embodied. So I let go of the constructs that I've been confused about. Maybe for a while I thought that I was my fear, or I thought that I was whatever judgment. And then embodiment practices come in and give me different choices. So I might take a walk in the woods and think, I want to embody the essence of that tree. I want to feel the way that I can root and connect to the earth and expand up and connect to the sky. And I know that my cells are made of the same stuff that makes the tree. So why can't I embody that? Or why can't I embody the essence of strength? Why can't I embody this memory of an embryonic pattern that can help me learn to walk more easily? So I think that in embodiment practices, we have a tool to understand and then to shift what we embody in the world. One of the things that I practice is called Embodied Astrology. My mother, who's passed now, was an astrologer, and so I grew up with the language of astrology as a way to contextualize life. Astrology is similar to mythology. It's a language that talks about larger patterns that most of us are very familiar with. I've found in my life it's a lot more effective than therapy because it can get right into the subtleties of the psyche without having to know the backstory. And the root of yoga is in the Ayurvedic practice, and Ayurveda has its own version of astrology called Jyotish, and it used to be that asana and pranayama and diagnosis through someone's stars all went hand in hand. And when you look at the Western scientists, who were the astronomers and the doctors like Aristotle and Plato, they were also astrologers. And so, it's only in the very recent human history that we have forgotten our connection to the heavens and to the elements. But for most of our lives as the species, we've understood ourselves as part of nature, not separate from. So I'm really interested in understanding this language as part of my body. And all of the planets and the signs have body correlations to different parts and different systems. And those relationships are expressed in the body. So I write a blog called Embodied Astrology, and I read people's charts and often do treatments with people where we explore movement practices and meditative awareness practices or hands-on touch to kind of resolve or make friends between challenging aspects in the body that talk about the astrology and really take advantage of the strengths and kind of alleviate the weaknesses. Well, one thing that is surprising often, and most people actually know it, but it's always surprising to remember, thinking about bodies and where they come from and what we think of as ourselves, is that when a female is born, she has all of the eggs, all of the ova that she'll ever create in one life. So that means that when your mother was born, she had the egg in her body already that created you, which also means that the egg that created you existed in your grandmother's body. And for me, whenever I remember this, I'm just amazed because I think a lot about samskara, which is a Sanskrit word that can roughly be translated as habit or pattern. It's kind of the groove that we get into habitually, relationally, the way that we're just accustomed to doing things and maybe don't even realize it. The whole world is formed on patterns. They're not bad, but then sometimes patterns are destructive or not efficient. And there's a lot of research being pursued now in the field of neuroscience about the impact of emotion and thought on the physical. And when we think about what experiences you had as a cell that existed in your grandmother's body, and what type of emotional story was there, or energetic patterning happened there, and then that you existed throughout the course of your mother's life, kind of makes you rethink who you actually are. So that's one thing I like to think about a lot, especially when I get caught up in, like, you know, the running around in my own thoughts about what seems really important in this moment. So I'm in graduate school right now. I'm pursuing a Master of Fine Arts at Portland State University. And it's my second year. It's a 3-year program. And over the course of the last year and a half, I've actually kind of lost my practice in some ways. And leading up to the beginning of this program, I had pretty much a daily practice, sometimes practicing asana for up to 2 or 3 hours. I would sit and meditate anywhere from 20 minutes to 40 minutes. And when I started school again, I tried to hold on and quickly realized that that wasn't going to be possible. So how I know my practice works is that now I notice it. And I had become so accustomed to a certain way of practicing before, where I had stopped noticing. And now when I go back and I even spend 5 minutes sitting and breathing, or 20 minutes moving my body, I feel the profound effect because I'm not used to it anymore. And with this kind of different perspective or different awareness of my practice, it's made me think a lot about how I've grown with it. And I started practicing when I was in my late teens. Now I'm in my early, almost mid-30s, and it's really shaped me as a human being. So I know that it works for me because I have the amazing opportunity right now to remember it and to see the way that it's shaped me and shaped my interests and my work in the world. And I'm really looking forward to getting back to a time and space where it might be part of a daily pattern again. But for now, I'm so grateful for the tools that I have from it that give me the awareness that any moment can be a moment for practice.